Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Proactively Monitor and Troubleshoot Citrix Performance Issues, featuring Citrix CTP fellow Carl Webster. We'll be getting started in just a couple minutes. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat or Q&A sections, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We are going to be discussing how to proactively monitor and troubleshoot Citrix performance issues. Today, you have myself, Stacy Leidwinger. I am here with Goliath. I also have Yemi Ladyju, who's our senior technical consultant. And we are very pleased and excited to have Carl Webster join us today. Carl is an independent consultant specializing in Citrix, Active Directory, and technical documentation. As his friends call him Webster, he serves the broader Citrix community. He writes a number of articles, and you can see them all on carlwebster.com. He's one of the most active people involved in the Citrix Zone, as well as the Experts Exchange. And Carl, we're ecstatic to have you because you do have quite a long history in the IT industry, going back all the way from the mainframes, PCs, application development, network engineering, and here in the new virtual and cloud infrastructure world. He's been working with Citrix since 1990 and with some of its first premier product lines as well. He specializes in writing scripts as well as a detailed, thorough approach in how-to articles, and that's why he's here today, is he's going to share some of that expertise in just a few minutes. So thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
So before we jump in, I did want to do a little bit of housekeeping. In terms of agenda today, I'm just going to spend a few minutes really talking about the challenges that we're seeing out there in terms of how organizations are struggling to really get ahead of performance issues, especially now that there's the increase of remote working. Then we're going to have Carl give some advice around how do you overcome those challenges? What does the day in the life look like for a Citrix admin? And what are some tips and tricks to help you as you go through and try to troubleshoot many of these issues or get ahead in a monitoring capacity? In that, we're also going to highlight where purpose-built technology can overcome some of these gaps that you're just not going to be able to achieve by manpower alone. And we'll even show you some of the technology Goliath has with Yemi to overcome those challenges. And as you heard, if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A box. If we can, we'll answer them throughout, or we'll get to them at the end. And one of the top questions we always get is, will this recording be available? Yes, within the next 24 hours, you'll have a copy of this recording in your inbox that you can review or share with others. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I've already started to talk about some of these challenges, but as you think about, especially now with this increased remote workforce, where are you spending so much of your time and day? And what are the challenges that you're really struggling with? I suspect, and Carl and I were just chatting before we opened up the line here, where there's often challenges because you don't have enough data to really identify where the issues lie. And in fact, all too often, you and IT are sitting on your heels waiting for end users to complain, waiting for those tickets, having your phone pinging in and out all day long. And now you're having a fire drill to go ahead and resolve. And so you're really looking for a way of, how do I get ahead of these issues? How do I not rely on users, or worse yet, rely on their apathetic nature where they're not even telling me that there's issues? How can I find empirical information and data so that I am not finger pointing on, it's not me, the Citrix admin, it's the storage team, or is it the end user? Is it their home Wi-Fi connection, right? There's a lot of elements that make up the user experience. And when you don't have data, it's hard to isolate root cause for those performance issues. And a lot of times this just leads to ongoing poor communication across IT teams, vendors, and users, all resulting in great frustration. And there's a good reason these challenges exist. These don't exist because anyone's done an improper job in setting up their virtualized environment. One of the main reasons these challenges exist today is because in order to deliver that end user experience, you need to have over 15 different technologies that all need to come together at the same time work seamlessly in order to have a good user experience. And so probably many of you on their phone know why it's so hard to monitor and troubleshoot that user experience, but you might have trouble articulating it to management or even other IT teams. So I wanted to break it down to here to really talk about the complexity, right? You have your users and every user is unique. How they work is unique. And now that they're working mostly remote, their entire environment is unique in behavior. You also have then that connection point, and that's become much more variable, much more out of your control as everyone's working from home. From there, then you've got your data infrastructure. So if you're running Citrix, you've got NetScaler, Storefront, your delivery services. You have your applications that you're servicing. If you're in healthcare, I notice we have quite a few health systems on the line today. You've got your EHR applications. If you're in manufacturing, it might be your ERP. You then have your back-end systems from licensing server, profile servers, Active Directory, and under that you have your hypervisor host layer. All of these are different technologies that need to come together. And to add even more complexity, most likely some or all are in the cloud or on premise. So you probably have this hybrid, and you might have different elements that you're moving to the cloud in the process of change. This architecture is not static. It's constantly changing, constantly being optimized. And so when a user complains because their system is slow or they're having a slow logon, if you don't have visibility across this entire infrastructure of all these different technologies and user behavior, it becomes really hard to identify where that root cause is. And this is really at the heart of a lot of those complexities. Next slide. The other challenge is there's frankly a lack of Citrix experts. There's a lack of people like Carl that have really drilled into these and have seen almost every issue that could potentially come up and solved it 10 times over. We actually worked with Citrix themselves, who helped us publish an infographic around this. And you just need to do the math. There's over 400,000 Citrix customers today. On average, you need 2 to 3 engineers to support that infrastructure, depending on size. So the need is around 1.2 million experts. If you look at the experts, there's only 62 at the highest qualification like Webster. Then you've got the next layer they call CTAs. Below that, you have anyone that's taken certification. So at best, you may have 50, 60,000 experts out there. Simply the supply does not equal the demand. And this is why often you need automation. You need purpose-built technology that's allowing to allow you to proactively troubleshoot and monitor that overall end-to-end user experience. Next slide. And as you look for this purpose-built technology, whether it be Citrix or VMware Horizon, I know we're talking about Citrix today, some of you may have a mixed environment, you really are looking for technology that can do 3 core things. You're looking for technology that can anticipate the issue so that you can address performance issues before end users are even impacted, automatically discovering your entire Citrix infrastructure, identifying every IT element, condition, and failure point that could potentially impact user experience, setting a threat-based alert for it, and alerting anytime there's an issue. You then need visibility across all those IT elements so that you can go ahead and troubleshoot issues both in real time and historically. And you need to be able to bring in other elements, like you are in healthcare, bringing in purpose-built modules that are bringing in performance data from those EHR applications like Cerner, Epic, Allscripts, Meditech. And finally, and maybe the most critical, and we're going to spend some time talking about this today, is having a purpose-built tool that's going to deliver documentation so that you can share information around the user experience. You can integrate that data with third-party tools, whether it be a ServiceNow for IT ticketing or an event system like Splunk. And then you want to be able to enhance it with out-of-the-box reports or integration into third-party visualization tools like Power BI or Tableau. And we see that when organizations truly invest in technology that allows them to anticipate, troubleshoot, and document end-user experience issues, they truly transform from being reactive, sitting back on their heels with those challenges I spoke about, and being proactive. And the biggest key about all of this is looking at technology that has embedded intelligence and automation so that you can go ahead and proactively address issues that happen in the most common trigger points. Almost 90% of all issues we see happen at logon initiation, logon duration, or in session performance. And so you absolutely need a tool that is going to allow you to monitor every event, condition, and failure point that hits around those triggering points and send you an alert when thresholds are exceeded. And you want to be able to do that automatically. You don't want to be reliant upon an external expert or other augmentation to tell you when these thresholds have been exceeded. And this is exactly what Goliath does. So this is my last slide before we turn it over to Carl here. And Goliath has been doing this for a number of years. So every single icon that you see on this screen right now uses Goliath. And the reason they use Goliath is that operationally, by using our technology that has that embedded intelligence and automation, they've augmented their staff to the equivalence of 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts that's available 376 days out of the year, available 24/7. And what you'll also notice is that we have some very large organizations that are able to go ahead and support the largest Citrix deployments. We also have small and medium-sized organizations because of the ease of use and the price profile that we offer. And the final takeaway here is I've mentioned healthcare several times. We have purpose-built modules for healthcare. We are known as the standard in health IT because we are the only monitoring and troubleshooting solution that has business and technical relationships with all the major EMR, EHR vendors. That's Epic, Cerner, Meditech, and Allscripts. And we can go ahead and correlate data across your VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure, plus user behavior, plus all elements into the EMR and EHR. So with that background, I'm now going to turn it over to Carl, who's going to talk a little bit more about the day in the life and articulate how he's overcome some of these challenges that we just talked about. Carl, it's all yours.
Thank you. And thank everyone for attending this webinar. I hope you find it very informative. So imagine with me, please. You are on the Citrix team. You're part of the lead of the Citrix team. And before you even get to work, your phone is sounding like a pinball machine. Just ding, 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 ding from text messages, emails, voicemails, because something has gone wrong and end users can't get in or they don't know what's going on. So end users are calling the help desk. The help desk is trying to reach you, and now it's gone up to management, and management is going nuts because things are not working. Citrix is not working, and it's all your fault. So why do users always know that the system is slow before the Citrix team does? Well, this slide title, Manual Checklist for Monitoring Citrix. If you've been in IT for any length of time, the word manual should scare you. Any manual process is more than likely not repeatable and is prone to problems, and then you're going to forget something or do something wrong because it's manual. And humans are involved in manual processes. You may be familiar or have heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Well, I would like to recommend to you that the first 5 habits of a highly effective person can make you a highly effective Citrix admin. The first is be proactive. The first habit is be proactive. The second is begin with the end in mind. And that end should be that you know about issues before anyone else does, and that your end users are taken care of. The third habit, put first things first. So what is first? It's not IT. And believe it or not, it's not your end users. The first thing our customers, whether they be patients or whether they be some retail, wholesale customers, or whether they're taxpayers. Those are the ultimate first thing because they are the most important. Because if it weren't for the patients and if it weren't for the taxpayers, if it weren't for our customers paying money into our employer, there would be no need for IT and none of us would have a job. The fourth, always think win-win. It should be a win for you and your Citrix team, a win for the end users, and a win for the customers. And then the fifth, seek first to understand. We need to understand what's going on. And now to put all these five together, Goliath and their great monitoring software. So if we're going to be doing things manually, I've created a few scripts. So you may have scripts that will go out there and do manual checks for some stuff, provided you remember where the scripts are, how to run the scripts, and all that stuff. You may manually log in from various site locations to ensure that the Citrix infrastructure and that your applications are available. What sounds nice, unless you're a global enterprise that has sites all over the world, and now you're going to have to go into every single one of those sites and try and figure out what's going on with your Citrix infrastructure, your applications. And as we saw in the previous slide, the complexity, you got your networking, you got your storage, you got your file servers, your profiles, your SQL, your license server, Active Directory, your NetScaler, storefront, delivery controllers, all these things go into making sure that our users can run their applications and serve our customers. And then you may be emailing or texting or calling the Wintel team or the networking team or the storage teams, trying to find out, hey, can you let me know, notify me if your systems are ever having issues or if they're ever down. And then you probably have some end users that are really good with computers and probably very good with their applications. They actually understand the applications. And so you may be in contact with them frequently, like maybe once a week or so, just checking in, hey, anything going on? But you're having to do all this stuff manually. So Goliath has a way to go through and help us be more effective Citrix admins. So we want to be proactive, not reactive. When your phone is going off because you don't know what's going on, that hurts your reputation, hurts your team's reputation, because management is going to wonder, why are we paying you, quote unquote, all this money and you don't even know what's going on? Why is it the end users have to be the one to tell us that things are not working? Why don't you know ahead of time? Well, with good monitoring, you can know about things before they happen. You know that something's not right. You can see in the monitoring software that things are going yellow, orange, red, not everything is green, and you can go in there and start work on resolving the issues before it impacts your end users, which impacts your customers, because you really don't want to be in the news for having a major outage and it costs your company lots of money. All right, next slide. So we have our
And
Citrix delivery infrastructure, and we've got our various offices and remote users. And I believe that Yemi, were you going to talk on this one, or?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and talk about really quickly how our customers leverage some of the proactive features of the technology to do just that, which is be proactive and get ahead of issues before users are actually impacted. And then also get out of the business of relying on them to report or to recreate some of the issues that they are seeing in the technology or while accessing their environment. So we have one of the proactive portions of the technology is called the application availability monitor, and how it's deployed is, as you can see in the middle of the screen, there's a central Goliath sort of console that is deployed in your delivery infrastructure, so that's or within your data center. And then we have what we call application launchers that are typically deployed at different locations. Essentially, those locations that users are logging into the environment from. So if you have users that are back at the office, if you have users that are remote, you can deploy this in the cloud like AWS or Azure. You can deploy this in different regions in AWS or Azure. And ultimately, what's happening is from these different locations, the technology is logging on and launching applications and desktops on a scheduled basis 24/7, essentially giving you an early warning system or a defense perimeter to be able to be alerted to issues before users start calling in, maybe after a maintenance window or things like that. And this has been very highly effective for a lot of our customers, especially in healthcare where we're launching applications 24/7. So to give you some perspective as to what's actually taking place from each of these different locations, I have just a quick video here showing this technology actually launching a Citrix session. So from that location, it's able to open up a web browser to the NetScaler or storefront page. It's able to log in the same way an end user would. It's then going to confirm that the storefront page loads, navigate the storefront page, and then start launching these applications and desktops on a scheduled basis. This will launch as many applications as you would like on a basis that really fits the needs of your users. So we have some enterprise customers start launching applications at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. So that they can get alerted to issues that take place. And if there is an issue that causes there to be a failure or issue inside of or causes the applications or desktops not to be available for the users, IT now gets a real-time alert, and then they're able to analyze each one of those launches from within the technology here at the application availability analysis tab. And this essentially is going to be your central management and configuration console for this portion of the technology. And this page is broken down into two sections. You have the top section, which gives you a high-level dashboard of all of the launches taking place across the entire environment. You can see the blue bars here represent the launch times, and then the trend line here is overall availability. We'll talk about documentation and things like that, but this is another view where you could take a quick screenshot or export this out and send it over to management to say, okay, for the last month or 2 months, here's what availabilities look like from a synthetic or from our application availability testing that we do around the clock. Now, the bottom section of the screen is where customers will go when they've received a failure. So 2 o'clock in the morning, there's a failure with a specific application not launching or multiple failures, which is indicative of a problem. You can then see the date and time of the launches taking place, what applications or desktops were being launched. You're able to see, of course, where they were being launched from your different locations. You can then see, of course, whether those launches were successful or if they failed. And if they failed, you can see at what stage they failed. So maybe they didn't have access to the NetScaler page, or the login credentials failed. Maybe there's something wrong with authentication. Applications may not be enumerating on the page, or might fail at the enumeration stage. Essentially, you get a breakdown of that, but you get even more detail if you, let's say, click here on this magnifying glass icon. Now you get screenshots of each stage of the process. And you can see the different stages depicted here at the top of the screen. So access, authentication, storefront confirmation, enumeration, and even the launch stage. So essentially, everything that we saw in that video is represented here with screenshots. So IT can not only get an early warning system or to be aware of these sort of issues that impact the Citrix environment being available, but they also have the ability to get out of the business of relying on users to replicate or to explain, what error message was on the screen and things like that. So getting you essentially out of a sort of reactive state, as Carl mentioned, into more of a proactive state, getting you the ability to be aware of these things before users are. So with that, I'll pass it over back over to Carl to talk about some other steps to troubleshoot other issues that happen in the environment.
All right. This is a common problem. As an independent consultant, I've been brought in many times at different companies across the country. And one of the main complaints is the average logon time. I've done a couple where the average logon time exceeds 8.5 minutes. I don't know about you, but as a user, I would find it very frustrating if I know that when I come in and I go into Citrix and I log in, that I actually have time to go grab a cup of coffee, go outside, chat, maybe smoke a cigarette or something, and then come back inside and maybe my application has launched or my published desktop is ready. And so as a consultant or, as a Citrix team member, when you get these slow logons, how do you troubleshoot slow logons? Well, you need to find a pattern. Is there any consistency around the slow logon times? Is it across the entire environment? If you've got multiple locations, is it a specific office, a specific location? Is it a specific published resource like a desktop or application? Is it just a specific group of users? And when you go in there, you have to then start looking at this mythical creation called an event log. They actually exist. They're not a myth. Event logs actually exist. The only problem is if you're in a large environment, if you have, say, 100 Citrix virtual app servers or XenApp servers, or you've got hundreds or thousands of published applications, trying to find which server may be having the issue or having to manually check all the event logs, because I got to check the application event log, I've got to check the system event log, and then I've got to dig down and find the Microsoft Group Policy event log. And dependent upon the size and busyness of your Citrix environment, there could be thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of events in these event logs, and you're going to filter them down looking for errors and warnings, which unfortunately don't always give you the true picture, because sometimes informational alerts actually show you the cause of the problem, but you're only looking for warnings and errors. And now you got to go and try and figure out, is it a group policy issue? Is it an issue with a specific group policy, or a specific user or group of users, or AD security group, or users in a specific department or country or something that are having problems with the group policies, you've got to start taking a look at their profiles. You've also got to take a look at, are you using folder redirection? Are you using home drives? Are you using Citrix profile management, FX Logics? All these things you have to go and look at. You've got to go and take a look at the virtual machines, your hypervisor host. Start taking a look at RAM, CPU usage. Are you having resource contention on your virtual app host or on the hypervisor host? Are there any issues with the networking? Do we have extreme latency possibly between users and the network and the resources? Or is there anything going on with storage? We're going to get onto a domain controller, maybe delivery controller, and start pinging the various virtual application servers or the virtual desktops. What kind of latency do we have there? And was your image optimized before you put it into production? Did you remember to run something like the Citrix Optimizer tool to make sure the image was optimized before you gave it to the users? So in the instance where for this one customer, they had an 8.5 minute average logon time, which of course means some users were taking much longer. There were users who had in excess of 20 minutes of logon time. And then obviously, because it's an average, you're going to have some users that are faster. Well, what I found out, because they had no monitoring software, I had to go out and create a script, which is on my website, defined, hey, what's the average group policy processing time across the environment? And then we started noticing that, hey, man, we got a lot of users that are spending 8, 10, 15, 20 minutes processing group policies. Then digging in, it's actually a group policy preference. Oh, these people are trying to map drives or map printers to drives and printers that they don't have permission to or that no longer exist. And in the case of this one customer, they actually had users in Singapore that for some reason got a group policy intended for people in the UK, and the people, the users in Singapore, were trying to map drives and printers across a WAN link to UK print servers, file servers. And so it took us a long time because they had no monitoring software. And it takes a lot of time. And hey, I'm an independent consultant. If you don't want to use monitoring software and you're paying me by the hour, I'll spend as much time as you want trying to get your slow logons resolved. But it's much better. And I really like it when you've got monitoring software from Goliath in your environment where we can actually take a look and we can see what are some of the causes for the logon times, and we can get an instant look at RAM and CPU usage on the hypervisors and the virtual machines. We can see what's going on the NetScaler and storefront and delivery controllers and with applications and with users. It makes it so much easier for us to be proactive rather than spend an entire week being reactive trying to fix slow logons. So Yemi, you want to show us how?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, I think you've so sort of eloquently put that together, because of course there are a number of different areas that you can go to investigate why a logon is taking place. And you know, again, going back to the complexity, and what our technology does is, if you look here on this portion that I'm sharing out now, which is our Citrix virtual apps and desktop session display. What our technology will do is it will automatically populate the sessions, but then it will align everything that impacted that session in one single view, so you have everything available to you for troubleshooting. What this will also do is this will allow you to not only view your current sessions or active sessions or sessions from today, you can actually go back and see sessions from a month ago or 2 months ago, depending on how long you'd like to keep your data for, right? With the same amount of granularity as you would from a session from today. Why is that important? This allows you, as someone in IT, to be able to determine what has changed in the environment, that maybe wasn't causing an issue for users log on maybe a week ago, but is now, right? You could compare those two and determine what those factors are. But when you isolate a user session here, you can go back, of course, search for a user, pull up their session, and then click down on their session. As I mentioned, you now have all of the information at your fingertips, and it can going into everything that affected the user session. So we have a dedicated tab for their logon performance. We have a dedicated tab for the ICA performance, the machine that they were connecting to, and you have detailed metrics on for the sort of resource performance of that VM for the time frame of the session. Everything's sort of aligned here. The same thing here for the hypervisor host. Detailed metrics on the data stores, what other VMs are being supported by that host, processes, applications, errors that have taken place, or alerts, even down to the event logs that have taken place, application or system error or warning events that have taken place inside of the user session. So essentially, if anything comes up, you have the ability to troubleshoot. But we'll focus here on this logon duration tab, because this is where we get detailed information step by step into what exactly impacted this user. And as you can see here, this page is broken down into two sections. You have the top section that's going to break down what's happening during the brokering stages of the process. And how I like to think about this is, on the left-hand side, you see what's going on within your data center. So drive mapping, printer mapping, profile load, session creation time from within the environment. And on the right-hand side, something that, of course, we all know impacts the user's logon is their client or their endpoint machine, right? And here on the right-hand side, you can see essentially what's taking place at the user's end when they're connecting into the environment. You're able to see things like ICA file download times, or how long it took to establish the micro VPN connection. You're able to see how long it takes for those startup processes to take place on their machine as well. And this is without deploying any technology to that user's endpoint machine. We're able to get this information, align it to the session, so that if you're seeing issues with, let's say, brokering and client validation, you can quickly determine where in the environment that's taking place. Now, the bottom section is going to give you a timeline of the logon, and then break it down into the different stages. And depending on what's actually configured in your environment, these stages expand. So if we take into consideration authentication here, once you expand that, you can see what OUs this user is a part of, what domain controller was in charge of authenticating this session. To Carl's point, if someone in Singapore is trying to connect or authenticate, but through a domain controller that's in England or something like that, that's obviously going to impact the logons. So having the details here to show that typically is going to allow you to quickly collapse that troubleshooting time frame and find the issues. You can also expand here group policies, where you can see each individual policy that affected the session and how long they took. Now, this is our lab environment, so there's really not much going on here as far as from a group policy perspective. But I have a screenshot here of an actual customer environment to show you the amount of detail that's actually going to present in this portion, of course, depending on what you have in your environment. So here you can see it's expanded group policy section, where you can see each individual policy and how long each one is taking. So your drive mapping policies, your printer mapping policies, folder redirection, anything that affects the user session, you're able to see. So this is how customers will be able to identify some of the things that Carl just pointed out, which is, oh, we're mapping drives, we're mapping sessions to drives that have been decommissioned, or oh, it looks like this printer is no longer available, or this user doesn't have access to this printer, but why is this printer then in their group policies? This information has been typically very helpful in essentially getting to the bottom of what is actually driving or causing the delays in your logon process. And again, having this historically allows you to track these things over time and see what has changed and what could be impacting users now that may not have been impacting them previously. So with that, I'll pass it over to Carl to talk about another scenario or another test case for technology like this.
All right, so one other customer that had very long logon times, we found it was one group policy that ran a logon script, and whoever wrote the logon script obviously didn't know what they were doing, because what it said is, hey, if the user is a member of this group, map this printer, wait 30 seconds. If the user is a member of this group, map this printer, wait 30 seconds. It did that for 29 printers. So if you are a user, every time you logged on, even if you were not a member of any of those groups, you sat there and it tested and you waited 30 seconds 29 times. Obviously, once we found that out, we removed all the stuff, and then we found out that by using this monitoring software, that the application was so poorly built, it took 9.5 minutes from the time they double clicked the icon on the published desktop. It was 9.5 minutes before the application screen actually came up and the user could log in. So we were able to make a design decision and say, hey, we'll just move all those printers inside of Citrix, and we made them session printers. So we got their logon down for their Citrix users from about 20 minutes down to about 8 seconds, because they were mainly just mapping printers. And instead, we moved all the printer processing to inside Citrix as session printers. Logons went real fast. They didn't care how long it took for the printers to show, because it was going to take, 9.5 minutes for that application to load. So by using good monitoring software and taking a look, and a deep look into everything, you can see what the problem is and then come up with solutions. The other problem probably everyone is having now is, because of COVID-19, we have a lot of people working from home. Now, working from home is nice. I've been working from home for 14 years. So the COVID stuff had absolutely no impact on me. But like my next door neighbor had always been driving into Nashville, hour and a half there, 2 hours back. He's loving working at home. So, but the problem is, if you send all your users home, you now have more users accessing the Citrix resources, accessing storage, accessing networking, pounding on your virtualization host. And now we can see into some of that stuff, but we really don't have much control over the computer that the user has, or their internet connection, or their Wi-Fi. So if my neighbor calls into his help desk and says, hey, the applications are slow, Citrix is slow, is it Citrix? Is it the company's connection to the internet? Is it the the end user, like my neighbor? Is it his internet connection? Is it his Wi-Fi, or is it his endpoint? So now if we're having lots of users reporting this, how do you go about comparing all these users? How do you know if it's a latency issue? How do you know if it's a bandwidth issue? How do you know if it's, your virtualization host are using up more CPU and RAM? You probably built more virtual app servers. You probably built more virtual desktops, and those require more resources from your virtualization host. What about we now have more users connecting remotely? So is our WAN connection a bottleneck? And then what about all the VMs or any of our VMs? What's our memory, our RAM, our disk utilization, network utilization on all of those additional VMs we had to build to now serve all those published resources to all the new remote users? Can you find patterns around the connection issues? How do you know that, hey, at 3 to 3:30, somewhere in there every day, problems start? How can you actually show that? Can you prove it? Can you get reports for all of that so that you can actually prove to management and then the bosses that are actually paying for all those infrastructure upgrades that it's not Citrix? And Yemi, if I'm correct, Goliath has excellent capability to show me that it's probably something going on at the end user's end and not my end. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, and we can jump right over to that portion of the technology here as well. So in the same vein, or in the same way, you would be able to look at an individual user session, similar to what we just did, to take a look at, individual logon problems. You can then isolate the session that you are looking for, click down on that session, and again, you have all the information pertaining to that user session. Now, in this case, we're looking at more session performance, but you have everything aligned in one single view so you can troubleshoot. And if you take that example, right, someone or you were trying to understand as IT where the slowness is coming from. The first thing that you would do, of course, when you click on their session, and let's say, I'm an IT pro and I get a call, from a user saying, my session is slow. The first thing that I would do is take a look here at ICA latency, or ICA round trip time, because this is going to tell me definitively whether or not the user does or does not have a problem within their session. So once we take a look at round trip time and we say, yes, this user is above the sort of company threshold or the Citrix recommended threshold, or 400 milliseconds sustained, then I want to understand why. Is that because of a network response time or network performance issues, or is it something on the back end with the resources? Maybe the resources are just running hot and causing the slowness. The quickest and easiest way to identify that is by looking here at network latency. This is real-time network latency. It's not a ping-based network latency. It's not something that you need to run some sort of external tools to get. This is something that we're getting from the ICA protocol itself for the time frame of the session. So essentially, you could look at a session and identify if it is poor network performance that is negatively impacting the user's performance. Now, if it is poor network performance, then you have to understand whether it is internal network or something from the user's end. How you make that determination is very, very simple, just by looking here at this connection speed metric. And this is a metric that we get without deploying any technology to the user's endpoint. But this metric is actually essentially the user's download speed at their location. So wherever they're connecting into the environment from, whether it's a Starbucks, whether it's their home office. We've had users that would connect to their Wi-Fi but be on their roof deck and their routers in the basement, right? So that sort of distance between the router and the user is going to create some poor connectivity. You're able to see that type of information here in their connection speed and say, hey, user, you have 1 megabit per second connection speed, which really isn't going to be enough to support a session. You need to do a couple of things to solve that. So essentially, giving IT a view into the home connection of the user allows you to quickly point to these sort of issues that are that come from, of course, everyone logging in and working remotely in this sort of environment that we're in today. Now, of course, if it isn't an issue with their connection speed, as I mentioned, we have the VM resources, the host resources that we can look at either from here in the summary tab, or of course, drilling into those specific details here in the rest of the tabs so that you can quickly point to a specific resource problem that's causing a problem or issue. You can point to maybe a specific process that is running on this machine that could be causing some sort of issues for this user, or if in a shared desktop or shared application environment, it could be causing issues for multiple users in the environment. And we also have the alerts and event logs, so you can quickly identify if there are any other things that are taking place on that machine that could be negatively impacting the session. So essentially, everything that affects the user will be presented here in a single view, and you can traverse this, identify those issues, and then of course share the data and focus on remediating this particular issue, as opposed to spending your time looking through different pieces and different tools to get an answer. And with that, so there's a lot of information here, and there's a lot of information here historically. And what we find is customers, it's really important to be able to troubleshoot issues as they happen, but it's also just as, or maybe even more important, to document these issues or document these things in your environment so that you could, have productive conversations with end users, have productive conversations with colleagues, or to prove to management that some of these issues have been solved. And Carl, I'm just going to pass it over to you, and if you could, talk about really quickly the importance of having sort of historical data and documentation after you've done your troubleshooting and sort of the proactive monitoring of your environment.
Yeah, so IT people like to look at the numbers, but what a lot of us Citrix admins miss is that when you begin troubleshooting, you need to have like a baseline. This is where everything was when we started, and then we made this change, and this is the result. We made this change. These are the results. So once so I'm one of these people. Yeah, I know I'm a consultant, charged by the hour, but I prefer to make one change at a time in an environment, because if I go in there and make 10 different changes and there's a negative effect, which of those 10 changes didn't work right or didn't work as I expected? So I'm one of these. I like making the initial baseline, make a change, gather data, make a change, gather data, make a change, gather data, until we have resolved the issue to the customer satisfaction. Now, the customer is usually the IT manager or whoever's in charge of the Citrix /virtualization team, but the managers, management, the C-level people, the people who actually pay the bill, they like reports, and they want to be able to see that we were here, we wound up here, and users are now happy, and now they'll pay my bill. And we need to have a way to document all that stuff, and we need to be able to have that stuff so that it's in a format that we can export, email, print. They may have different systems. They may want to integrate all that documentation into third-party tools, or they may use Power BI or some other tools, and they want to enhance all those reports so that someone can sit there and generate a view that they want. And I do believe Goliath excels in those capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably couldn't have said that better myself. Yeah, when we talk about data, what we hear is that it is important to be able to share the data, whether that's through different screens in the product, through out of the box reporting, things that can be sent out via email, things of that nature. We also need to be able to integrate the data with existing tools as well. We understand that IT is very vast, and this is not going to be the only technology available, and you have your own sort of processes for things in your environment. So leveraging data from the technology, whether that's alerts or reports, and integrating them into the existing technologies really helps in getting the information and driving real-time decisions based on the data the vast amount of data that we're collecting and presenting. And then finally, of course, being able to enhance the data to make some more advanced correlations, whether that's leveraging tools like Power BI or Tableau, and really to visualize the data and give management a better understanding of the improvements that have taken place. Now, we do have some examples of reports and ways that we enhance and we share and integrate data. I won't spend too much time going through, I won't go through each one of these. However, I would go through some of the most popular ones, especially now in this remote workspace time period that we're in. So here we can see the end user experience report. This is one of the out of the box reports that are very, very helpful to management to understand overall experience in the environment, whether that is for logon times, ICA latency or session performance, and also connection speed as the users are accessing the environment. Another one that's been very popular, of course, has been the end user productivity report, which is going to essentially give you an understanding of users and how many users are connecting into the environment, how productive or active are they in the environment. So this is going to break down, as you can see here, the duration of their session, their interaction time, which is the amount of time that they're actually creating ICA traffic inside of their sessions, the inactivity time, of course, which will be the amount of time that they're not creating ICA traffic in their sessions. You have a percentage, a max inactivity time, as well as the applications that are that they were leveraging as well. Essentially, this gives IT and management the ability to understand how users are working in this sort of climate, but also to make some correlations specifically with, let's say, end user experience issues and how that impacts productivity in the environment. Maybe this user isn't being very productive because his average ICA latency is 500 milliseconds, which is going to be very frustrating and is going to cause him not to want to do work, right? So those sort of things are tracked, leveraging our reports, and you can, of course, leverage this to show the improvements in productivity as the performance or the session performance has improved overall in the environment. Those are just some examples. Of course, we have other examples, and we can definitely show more if you guys would like to see that. With that, I'll pass it over to Stacy so that we can wrap up.
Great. Well, I want to thank both you, Yemi and Carl. We are running at the top of the hour here, but this is a lot of great information. One question I know we always get, and in fact, I see it here in the Q&A, is how long does this take to get up and running? So in fact, you can get Goliath up and running really in under 2 hours. So we offer a white glove service. We have our technical consultants that can allow you to leverage all of our out-of-the-box reports, alerts, all of that embedded intelligence and automation, which Yemi showed for troubleshooting, is there. So you truly can get up and running very quickly. And if you're interested in learning more, please go ahead and email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. With this, we can set up a custom demo. We can go ahead as well as set up any free trials. We provide free access to our software so that you can go ahead and use that. We are running a little bit of out of time, but I do have to share, Carl, you've got one question of Manish, and I probably butchered his name, asks if he can take you out for a beer.
Well, most people don't know it, but see, so I've been sober for 44 years now, so I don't drink, but you can take me out for a bottle of water.
Maybe a good steak dinner.
Yeah.
Well, great. I do apologize. I know everyone's got and also he's a water guy too. So it sounds like you guys can connect.
Right.
But I'd be happy to share, Carl, I think anyone can come to your website, right? carlwebster.com as well if they want to connect directly with you. Well,
yeah,
again,
and I make myself hard to find on the internet. So, I'm carlwebster.com. I'm Carl Webster on Twitter. I'm Carl Webster on Facebook. I'm Carl Webster on LinkedIn. I hide myself very well on the internet.
Excellent. And I do apologize. We have a few questions. We'll follow up with them offline because I do know a few of our speakers here have to jump into their next meeting. But again, Carl, can't thank you enough. I can't thank enough for the audience that joined today. And please do reach out if you have questions for us at Goliath or for Carl. And Carl, thank you again. It's been great doing another webinar with you.
Thank you for giving me the honor of doing this for you.
All right. We'll talk to everyone shortly. Have a great day. Thank you.